Welcome back to Farmer's Lore. May your day be steady, honest, and filled with Christ's strength. And now, let's turn to the page to today's story from the fields.
Martin Russell sits in his farmhouse kitchen in December 2024, age 78, holding a photograph from February 1982. 18 farmers standing in front of the John Deere dealership in Hampton, Iowa, smiling, confident, proud. 17 of them had just signed financing papers for new tractors. One of them, Martin, standing slightly apart on the left edge, had declined. 42 years later, Martin is the only one still farming. The other 17 lost everything. This is how it happened. February 12th, 1982. Rick Carlson's dealership was hosting a special financing event. Interest rates were at 15.8%, but Rick had secured a promotional rate from John Deere Financial, 13.9% for qualified buyers. In a market where money cost 16 to 18%, 13.9% seemed like a gift. Rick invited his top customers, farmers who'd bought from him for years, farmers with good credit, strong operations, 400-plus acres. Martin Russell was invited because he farmed 440 acres and had been a customer since 1967. The presentation started at 7:02 p.m., coffee and donuts. Rick at the front with a microphone and a flip chart showing payment schedules. 18 farmers sitting in folding chairs. Gentlemen, I'll be direct. Times are tough. Grain prices are down. Interest rates are high. But this is exactly when smart farmers invest. Your competitors are pulling back. This is your chance to gain advantage. New equipment means higher yields, lower downtime, better efficiency. And John Deere Financial is offering 13.9% financing through March 15th. That's 2 points below prime rate. 2 years ago, you couldn't get financing under 10%. Now you can lock in 13.9% for 5 years. Paul Henderson, age 52, raised his hand. Rick, 13.9% is still high. 5-year loan on a $40,000 tractor means, what, $9,000 a year in payments? $8,760, Rick corrected. But look at it this way. You're farming, let's say, 480 acres. Current yields around 142 bushels. That's 68,000 bushels. At today's price of $232, that's 157,000 gross. Your old tractor costs you maybe 5 to 8 bushels per acre in lost efficiency. That's 30 to 50 bushels per acre in opportunity cost. On 480 acres, that's 14,000 to 24,000 bushels you're losing. At $232, that's $32,000 to $55,000 leaving your farm every year because your equipment isn't optimal. The math was compelling. The logic seemed sound. Tom Mitchell, age 49, spoke up. What models are we talking about? 440s mostly, some 4640s for the larger operations. Excellent machines, proven. The 4440 is 95 horsepower, handles any implement, comfortable cab, reliable hydraulics. It's the backbone of American agriculture. Down the row of chairs, farmers were nodding. The 4440 had a reputation, solid tractor. Everyone knew someone who ran one successfully. Martin Russell sat quietly listening. He farmed 440 acres with a 1966 Farmall 806 he'd bought used in 1972 for $8,400. The tractor was 16 years old, had 11,200 hours on it, but ran perfectly because Martin maintained it religiously. He'd rebuilt the engine in 1978 for $1,180, replaced the clutch in 1980 for $340. His total investment in the tractor was $9,920 over 10 years. It was paid for. Rick continued. Here's what I'm proposing. Trade in your current equipment. I'll give you fair value. More than fair, honestly, because I want your business. Finance the balance at 13.9% over 5 years. Lock in this rate before March 15th when the promotion ends and rates go back to market levels. Bill Stevens, age 55, asked the key question. Rick, what happens if grain prices don't recover? What if interest rates stay high? What if this isn't a temporary downturn? Rick smiled, confident. Bill, I've been in this business 26 years. I've seen cycles. Prices always recover. This is agriculture. People need food. The fundamentals are solid. This crisis is temporary. The farmers who invest now will dominate for the next 20 years. The farmers who don't, well, they'll regret it. The room was silent. Rick's confidence was persuasive. He believed what he was saying. More importantly, the other farmers believed him. One by one they signed. Paul Henderson, $44.40, $39,600. Trade-in, $8,200. Financed, $30,400. Tom Mitchell, $44.40, $39,600. Trade-in, $7,800. Financed, $31,800. Bill Stevens, $46.40, $47,200. Trade-in, $9,100. Financed, $38,100. Down the line. 17 signatures. 17 commitments. Martin Russell sat in his chair watching. When Rick got to him, clipboard ready, Martin said quietly, "I'm going to pass, Rick." "Martin, this is a limited time offer. After March 15th, I understand. I'm still passing." "Can I ask why?" Martin chose his words carefully. "My 806 is paid for. It works. I can't justify borrowing $30,000 in this economy." Rick looked disappointed but not surprised. "You're going to regret this, Martin. In 5 years, you'll be so far behind you won't catch up." "Maybe so." The meeting broke up around 9 p.m. Rick's assistant took the group photo outside. 18 farmers in front of the dealership. 17 happy with their decisions. One quietly uncertain if he'd just made a terrible mistake. The tractors were delivered over the next 4 weeks. Shiny green machines, 44 40s and 46 40s, delivered to farms across Franklin County. The farmers showed them to neighbors, talked about the features, felt successful. Martin kept farming with his 1966 Farmall 806. Neighbors commented, "Martin's still running that old red tractor." Not meant cruelly, just observation. Martin was the guy who didn't upgrade. The first sign of trouble came in late 1982. Corn prices fell to $2.10 by November. The 17 farmers with new John Deeres suddenly found their projections weren't working. Gross incomes fell 15 to 20%. But equipment payments stayed fixed, $8,160 per year, whether corn was $2.32 or $2.10. Paul Henderson did the math in December 1982. His gross fell from $157,000 to $134,000. His operating costs were $88,000. His equipment payment was $8,160. That left $37,240 for living expenses and savings. Doable, but tight. Much tighter than the $57,000 he'd had the year before. By 1983, corn was $2.10 consistently. Paul's gross was $134,000 again, but operating costs had increased to $94,000, fertilizer up, chemicals up, fuel up. His equipment payment was still $8,760. That left $31,240. Very tight. By 1984, Paul Henderson was in crisis. He was 2 months behind on his equipment payment. John Deere Financial sent a letter, pay within 30 days or face repossession. Paul called Rick Carlson. "Rick, I can't make these payments. I need help." "Paul, I sold you the tractor. I don't control the financing. That's John Deere Financial. You need to work with them. You told us prices would recover. I thought they would. I was wrong." Paul refinanced his land to cover the equipment debt, borrowed $35,000 against his farm at 16.2%. Paid off John Deere Financial. Now his equipment was paid for, but he had new land debt, not a solution, just a delay. Tom Mitchell went a different route. Stopped making equipment payments in 1985. Let John Deere repossess the 4440. They took it in March 1985, sold it at auction for $18,400. Applied that to his loan balance of $24,200. Tom still owed $5,800 on a tractor he no longer owned. Bill Stevens held on until 1986. Then lost his farm completely, bank foreclosed. His 560 acres sold for $710 per acre, $397,600. After paying off all debts, Bill walked away with $28,000, moved to Mason City, got a job at a factory. One by one, the 17 fell. By 1990, 8 years after that February meeting, 12 of the 17 had either lost their farms completely or had refinanced land to cover equipment debt they couldn't service. By 1995, 15 of the 17 were gone from farming. 2 survivors, Robert Klein, who'd inherited money from a deceased uncle in 1987 and used it to pay off his debt, and James Williamson, who declared bankruptcy in 1986, discharged his equipment debt and somehow kept farming with salvaged equipment. By 2005, Robert Klein retired and sold his farm. James Williamson lost his farm in 2003 to medical debt after a cancer diagnosis. By 2024, all 17 were either dead, retired and poor, or working non-farm jobs. Martin Russell, who'd kept his paid-off 1966 Farmall 806, was still farming. His story is simpler than the 17 failures. He farmed his 440 acres throughout the 1980s with the 806, maintained it carefully. His annual equipment costs averaged $840. No payment, just maintenance. While his neighbors were paying $8,000 to $9,000 per year in equipment debt, Martin was paying $840. That's $7,000, $8,000 annual difference, invested carefully, compounded over 40 years. In 1992, Martin bought 240 acres from a foreclosure auction for $850 per acre. Paid cash $204,000. He'd saved it over the previous 10 years. In 2001, Martin bought another 160 acres for $1,120 per acre, $227,200. Paid cash again. By 2024, Martin owns 840 acres free and clear. He's 78, still farms, uses hired help for the heavy work. His land is worth approximately $4,700 per acre, $348,000 total. The 17 farmers who bought new John Deeres in February 1982, combined, they probably have less than $300,000 in total assets. Most are dead. The survivors are living on Social Security. Martin sits in his kitchen, looking at that photograph from 1982. 18 farmers, 17 confident they'd made the right choice, one uncertain, wondering if he was being left behind. I wasn't being left behind, Martin says to no one in particular. They were falling forward into a trap. I was standing still on solid ground. 18 farmers at a dealership meeting in February 1982. 17 signed for new John Deeres. One kept his paid-off tractor. 42 years later, only he still farms. Sometimes refusing to move forward is the smartest move you can make. But the story of those 18 farmers deserves more detail. Each of the 17 who fell had a story. Each made a rational decision that turned catastrophic. Understanding why requires going deeper. The February 1982 meeting wasn't Rick Carlson's idea alone. John Deere Financial had regional quotas. They needed to move inventory during the worst agricultural crisis since the Depression. The 13.9% rate was real, but it was calculated desperation. Get farmers into debt now, collect later, accept losses on some to maintain market share. Rick knew this, but he also believed the crisis was temporary. He'd lived through the 1970s boom, had seen land values quintuple, had watched farmers get rich. To Rick, 1981 to 82 was a correction, not a collapse. He genuinely believed the 17 farmers would thank him in 5 years. Let's go through what happened to each one. Paul Henderson, age 52 in 1982, farmed 480 acres, married with 3 teenage children, bought a 44 440 for $39,600, financed $31,400. Paul was the cautious one, had asked the hard questions during the meeting, but he'd signed anyway because everyone else did. Social pressure, fear of being left behind. Paul's crisis came in stages. First, 1984, 2 months behind on payments, refinanced his land, borrowed $35,000 at 16.2%. That solved the equipment debt, but created new land debt. Monthly payment, $610 or $7,220 annually. Second crisis, 1987. His youngest daughter needed college tuition. Paul didn't have $8,000 for her first year, borrowed against the farm again. Third crisis, 1989. Low grain prices, high debt service, couldn't make payments. Foreclosure started in 1990. Paul lost his 480 acres in May 1991, sold for $920 per acre, $441,600. After paying off debts, now totaling $387,000, Paul netted $54,600, moved to Waterloo, worked at John Deere factory, ironically. Died in 2018 at age 88, poor. Tom Mitchell, age 49 in 1982, farmed 520 acres, divorced, lived alone, bought a 4440 for $39,600, financed $30,800. Tom was the optimist, believed Rick's pitch completely. Farming would rebound. This was investment. Tom's approach was aggressive. When he couldn't make payments in 1985, he didn't refinance. Just stopped paying. Let John Deere repossess the tractor in March 1985. They auctioned it for $18,400. Applied that to his $20,200 balance. Tom still owed $5,800 on nothing. John Deere Financial sued, won judgment, garnished Tom's grain payments for 3 years. Every bushel Tom sold, John Deere took 15% off the top. Tom couldn't survive that, lost his farm in 1988. Sold for $840 per acre, $436,800. After debts and the judgment, netted $32,000. Moved to Cedar Rapids, worked security until 2010. Died in 2021 at age 88. Bitter about the whole experience. Bill Stevens, age 55, in 1982, farmed 560 acres, married with 2 adult sons who'd moved to cities. Bought a 4640 for $47,200, financed $38,100. Bill was the oldest at the meeting, should have been most cautious, but he wanted to prove he could still compete, still grow. Bill's crisis was fastest. By 1984, he was $18,000 behind on combined equipment and operating loans. Tried to sell 160 acres to discharge debt. Market was terrible. Could only get $720 per acre, $115,200. After selling costs, netted $108,000. Not enough. Bank foreclosed on remaining 400 acres in 1986, sold for $710 per acre, $284,000. After debts, Bill walked away with $28,000 from a farm he'd built over 30 years. Bill moved to Mason City, got a factory job at age 59. Worked until 70, lived on Social Security until death in 2017 at age 90, never talked about farming, too painful, and so on through the 17. Each story similar, initial confidence, then surprise when prices didn't recover, then scrambling to survive, then eventual failure. Robert Klein was the lucky one of the 17. He'd bought a 4440, financed $32,200. By 1987, he was months from losing his farm. Then his uncle died, left him $87,000. Robert used it to pay off the John Deere loan completely and catch up on other debts. He survived. Farmed until 2005, then sold and retired. Not wealthy, but solvent. James Williamson was different. He'd bought a 4440, couldn't make payments, declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 1986, discharged his equipment debt, lost the 4440, kept his land through homestead protection, bought a worn-out International 1066 at auction for $4,200, used that to farm, barely survived through the 1990s, lost everything in 2003 when his wife got cancer, medical bills destroyed them, foreclosed, ended up with nothing. By 2024, those 17 farmers, 17 confident men in February 1982, were gone. Dead or broken or barely surviving. Martin Russell was different from the beginning. He wasn't confident. He was worried. That February night in 1982, driving home from the dealership meeting, Martin's wife Linda asked, "Why didn't you buy the tractor? Everyone else did." Everyone else might be wrong. But Rick said, Rick is a salesman. He gets paid when we buy. His interests aren't our interests. Nee. Paul Henderson bought one. Tom Mitchell, Bill Stevens. They're smart farmers. They're making a bet that the crisis is temporary. I think it's not temporary. What if you're wrong? What if the crisis ends and you're stuck with that old 806? Then I'll be behind, but I won't be bankrupt. That conversation, that willingness to accept being behind rather than risk bankruptcy, was the difference. Martin's approach through the 1980s was radical in its simplicity. Minimize costs, save aggressively, wait for opportunity. His 1966 Farmall 806 cost him $840 annually in maintenance. Oil changes every 100 hours. Filters, occasional repairs. In 1984, he rebuilt the hydraulic pump for $420. In 1986, replaced the starter for $180. In 1989, rebuilt the transmission for $1,240. Total maintenance over the decade, $8,400. Average, $840 per year. His neighbors were paying $8,000, $9,000 annually in equipment debt. Martin was paying $840. That's $7,000 difference every year for a decade, $70,000 saved. But Martin didn't just save, he farmed carefully. His yields weren't lower than neighbors with new equipment. In some years, they were higher because Martin scouted more carefully, sprayed more precisely, harvested at optimal moisture. In 1985, when 3 of his neighbors couldn't afford herbicide, their yields dropped 8 to 12 bushels per acre due to weed pressure. Martin bought the herbicide, spent the extra $1,800, maintained yields. That $1,800 expense saved him $2,080 in lost yield at 2.10 corn. Martin understood what his neighbors didn't. Farming is about net, not gross. They focused on maximizing production. He focused on maximizing profit. By 1991, Martin had $189,000 saved. Land was cheap. Foreclosures everywhere. He found a 240-acre farm, estate sale, heirs wanted it gone, listed at $900 per acre. Martin offered $850 cash, deal closed in 30 days. Martin paid $204,000, owned 680 acres free and clear. His neighbors were shocked. Where'd Martin get 200 grand? They'd seen him as poor, behind the times, farming with old equipment. Turns out he was the richest farmer in the county. In 2001, another opportunity. A 160-acre farm, owner retiring, no children interested. Martin bought it for $1,420 per acre, $220,200, again cash. Total 840 acres owned free and clear. Through the 2000s and 2010s, Martin farmed steadily. His equipment wasn't new, but it was paid for. He bought a used John Deere 4430 in 2003 for $22,000 cash, finally upgraded from the 1966 Farmall after 37 years. The 4430 was a 1978 model, 25 years old when Martin bought it, but reliable. Martin farmed until 2024. At 78, he still works the farm with hired help. His son-in-law manages day-to-day operations. Martin handles strategy and marketing. In December 2024, Martin received a letter from Bill Stevens' widow. Bill had died in 2017, but his wife was cleaning out boxes, found the photograph from February 1982. 18 farmers at the dealership. She sent copies to the survivors. Martin looked at that photograph, remembered the meeting, remembered Rick's pitch about smart farmers investing during tough times, remembered the confidence in the room, remembered his own uncertainty. He thought about the 17 others. Where were they now? Paul Henderson, dead, 2018. Tom Mitchell, dead, 2021. Bill Stevens, dead, 2017. Robert Klein, alive, retired in Arizona on a small pension. James Williamson, dead, 2014, broken, down the list, 12 dead, 4 alive but struggling financially. 1, Robert Klein, comfortable but not wealthy. Martin Russell, still farming, worth nearly $4 million in land alone. Martin called Robert Klein in Arizona. They hadn't spoken in 15 years. "Robert, it's Martin Russell." "Martin, how are you?" "Good, still farming. I got a photograph in the mail from 1982, the dealership meeting." Silence. Robert remembered. "You were smart, Martin. You didn't buy." "I was scared. That's different from smart." "Whatever it was, it worked." "I heard you own 840 acres now." "Free and clear. I sold my 480 in 2005, got 800,000 after taxes. Seemed like a fortune. Now I'm living on Social Security, and that money's nearly gone. Medical expenses, inflation, bad investments. I'll probably run out of money in 5 years. I'm sorry, Robert. Don't be. I made choices. We all did. You made the right choice. The rest of us didn't." That conversation stayed with Martin. The 17 who'd bought new John Deeres in 1982 weren't fools. They were rational actors, making decisions based on information available and beliefs they held. They believed the crisis was temporary. They believed Rick Carlson knew what he was talking about. They believed growth was essential. Martin believed differently. He believed the crisis would last. He believed debt was dangerous. He believed survival mattered more than growth. In early January 2025, a reporter from Successful Farming magazine contacted Martin. The magazine was doing a retrospective on the 1980s farm crisis. Someone had mentioned Martin's story, the farmer who didn't buy equipment in 1982 and outlasted everyone else. The reporter interviewed Martin for 2 hours. At the end, she asked, "Do you think the 17 farmers who bought equipment were wrong to do so?" Martin thought carefully. No, they made a reasonable bet based on historical patterns. Farming had boomed for a decade. They expected it to continue. I made a different bet based on my temperament. I'm risk-averse. Maybe too much. If the boom had continued, I'd have been left behind. I got lucky that my caution matched the moment. Do you have regrets? I regret that my friends suffered. I don't regret my choices. What would you tell young farmers today? The same thing I'd have told those 17 in 1982. Debt is a tool, but it's a dangerous tool. Use it only when you must. Prefer paid-for equipment to financed equipment. Prefer survival to growth. You can always grow later. You can't survive later if you're bankrupt now. The article ran in March 2025. Included the photograph from 1982, 18 farmers at the dealership. The caption, "Only one is still farming." That photograph tells the story better than words. 17 confident men who believed they were making smart investments. One uncertain man who believed survival mattered more than growth. 43 years later, the uncertain man is the only success. 18 farmers bought into the dream in February 1982. 17 bought new John Deeres. One kept his paid-off tractor. Only he still farms. Sometimes the crowd is wrong. Sometimes standing alone on solid ground beats moving forward with the crowd into quicksand. The years between 1982 and 1995 were Martin's wilderness period. Not financially, he was stable, but socially. Being the only farmer who didn't upgrade created isolation. At the co-op in spring 1983, Martin overheard Paul Henderson and Tom Mitchell talking. "Martin's still running that old Farmall. Thing's got to be 17 years old now. How long can he keep that up?" Rick said he'll regret not upgrading, said he'd be left behind. Martin was standing 3 feet away, could hear everything. They knew he could hear, didn't care or didn't notice. At church in summer 1984, Bill Stevens' wife commented to Linda Russell, "Bill got the new John Deere, says it's saving him time and fuel. Doesn't Martin want to make things easier?" Linda replied diplomatically, "Martin's happy with what we have. But doesn't he want to keep up?" The social pressure was constant, not aggressive, just ambient. The assumption that Martin was making a mistake, was being left behind, was too cheap or too scared to do what successful farmers did. Martin felt it, questioned himself repeatedly. In September 1984, after Paul Henderson finished harvest, 2 weeks before Martin did, Martin wondered if he should have bought newer equipment. Paul's 4440 was faster, more powerful. Martin's 806 was slower, smaller. Paul gained 2 weeks. But Martin also knew Paul was $18,000 behind on payments. Was 2 weeks worth $18,000 in debt? The isolation peaked in 1986-87. By then, the crisis was undeniable. 4 of the 17 had lost farms. 7 more were in serious trouble. The remaining 6 were hanging on by threads. Martin remained stable. His financial position improved. He'd saved $74,000 by end of 1986. But his social position worsened. The farmers who were failing resented him. He'd been right. They'd been wrong. That created bitterness. In March 1987, at a coffee gathering at the co-op, Bill Stevens confronted Martin. "You must be happy, watching all of us go broke while you sit pretty with your paid-off equipment." Martin was shocked. "Bill, I'm not happy about this at all. I'm devastated to see what's happening. But you didn't buy. You were smarter than us." "I wasn't smarter, I was luckier. I happened to be cautious at the moment when caution mattered. If this had been 1975, you'd have been right and I'd have been the fool." "That's generous of you to say, but we both know the truth. You were right, we were wrong. And now I'm losing my farm because I listened to Rick Carlson instead of my gut." Bill lost his farm 2 months later. Never spoke to Martin again. Moved to Mason City. Cut off contact with everyone from farming. Too painful. By 1990, 12 of the 17 were gone. The ones who remained, Robert Klein, James Williamson, and 3 others barely holding on, avoided Martin. He represented what they should have done and didn't. Martin's loneliness during this period was real. His wife Linda noticed it. "You don't have friends anymore." "I have friends. They're just busy. They avoid you." "I remind them of their mistakes. That's hard to be around." "But you didn't make them make those choices." "I know, but they see me and think about what could have been if they'd done what I did." In 1992, when Martin bought his first 240 acres at auction, the isolation intensified. Where did he get $200,000 cash? People assumed inheritance or lottery. The truth, he'd saved it through discipline, was less dramatic but more threatening to their narratives. If Martin had saved $200,000 through simple discipline, that meant they could have 2. That meant their failures weren't just bad luck. That meant they'd made choices that destroyed them. That realization was too painful. Easier to avoid Martin than confront their own decisions. The breakthrough came in 1998. A young farmer, Daniel Chen, moved to the area. 28 years old, no family history in farming, bought a small 180-acre farm with inheritance from his grandmother. Daniel heard about Martin, sought him out. "Mr. Russell, people say you're the farmer who didn't go broke in the 80s. I'm one of them. A few others survived." "Can you tell me how?" Martin appreciated Daniel's directness. They talked for 3 hours. Martin explained his philosophy: avoid debt, maintain equipment carefully, save aggressively, wait for opportunity. Daniel absorbed it. "Everyone else tells me I need to expand fast, buy bigger equipment, leverage assets. Everyone else might be wrong, again." "Were you lonely, being the only one who didn't buy?" Martin paused. "Yes, very lonely. My neighbors stopped talking to me. I represented their failure. Was it worth it?" "Financially, absolutely. Socially, it was hard. But I'd rather be lonely and solvent than popular and bankrupt." Daniel followed Martin's advice. Bought used equipment, avoided debt, expanded slowly. By 2024, Daniel owns 520 acres free and clear, is one of the strongest farmers in the county. The irony: Martin's isolation in the 1980s and 1990s created a legacy in the 2000s and 2010s. Young farmers heard about him, sought his advice, copied his approach. What looked like failure socially became success generationally. In 2015, at a Farm Bureau meeting, Martin was asked to speak about surviving the 1980s crisis. He was 82, still farming. In the audience, 23 farmers, most under 40. Martin stood at the podium, looked at the young faces. "I want to tell you about a photograph from February 1982. 18 farmers at a John Deere dealership. 17 bought new tractors that night. I didn't. Today, I'm the only one still farming, not because I was smarter, because I was scared." He paused. Fear isn't always bad. Sometimes fear is wisdom. My father lost a farm in the Depression. I grew up knowing what debt could do. That fear saved me. The 17 others didn't have that fear. They believed Rick Carlson when he said the crisis was temporary. They believed growth was essential. They were wrong. Not because they were stupid, but because the moment was different than they expected. A young farmer raised his hand. "Do you regret not buying? Do you wish you'd trusted the boom?" "No, because I understand something now that I didn't understand in 1982. There's no right answer in farming. There are only choices and consequences. I made cautious choices. The consequences were survival. They made aggressive choices. The consequences were failure. In a different era, with different circumstances, I'd have been the fool and they'd have been geniuses." Another question. Would you give the same advice today? I don't know today's circumstances well enough, but I know this. Debt is always dangerous. Equipment payments are always fixed while income is always variable. That math doesn't change. If you borrow, borrow minimally. If you can avoid borrowing, do, and never ever let a salesman tell you that missing an opportunity is worse than risking bankruptcy. That speech resonated. Several young farmers approached Martin afterward, asked for mentorship. Martin agreed. By 2024, 7 farmers in Franklin County credit Martin Russell with teaching them financial discipline. In December 2024, sitting in his kitchen looking at that photograph from 1982, Martin thinks about legacy. The 17 who bought new John Deeres left almost nothing: broken families, lost farms, financial ruin. He'll leave 840 acres to his daughter's family, debt-free, plus approximately $600,000 in cash and investments. But more than that, he'll leave a philosophy: survival first, growth second, caution over confidence, fear over faith. The reporter who interviewed him asked if he had advice for farmers facing today's challenges: rising land prices, expensive equipment, pressure to expand. "Same advice I'd give in 1982. Can you survive if everything goes wrong? If prices crash, if rates spike, if income drops 50%, can you survive? If the answer is no, you're taking too much risk. Scale back, get more conservative, make choices that keep you farming even in worst-case scenarios. Because worst-case scenarios happen more often than people think. That wisdom comes from experience. Martin watched 17 confident farmers make aggressive choices and lose everything. He made cautious choices and survived. It's not heroic, it's not exciting, but it worked. In February 2025, 43 years after that dealership meeting, Martin will turn 79. He'll still be farming. His daughter and son-in-law will manage operations, but Martin will provide strategy. Robert Klein, the one other semi-success from the 17, will be 82, living in Arizona on declining savings. The rest, dead or barely surviving. 18 farmers at a dealership meeting in February 1982. 17 believed in growth, expansion, leverage. 1 believed in survival, caution, patience. 43 years later, only the cautious one remains. The photograph sits on Martin's kitchen table. He looks at it often, sees the faces of friends who failed, feels sadness for their losses, feels gratitude for his choices, feels the weight of having been right when being right meant watching friends suffer. "I wish I'd been wrong," Martin sometimes says to Linda. "I wish Rick Carlson had been right." I wish the boom had continued and everyone had succeeded. I'd gladly accept having been the fool if it meant my friends kept their farms. But that's not what happened. The boom didn't continue. Rick was wrong. The 17 farmers lost everything. Only Martin, the uncertain man who kept his paid-off tractor, survived. 18 farmers, 1 photograph, 1 survivor. Sometimes standing still is the fastest way forward.